Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I have a review of this little guy right here. This is the Reeve Knives Small Sebenza 21. First off, I want to thank my Patreon patrons who make this channel possible. Thank you very much for that. This is a part of my personal collection, and they make those kinds of things possible, so thank you. Next thing, actually, I can skip the size comparison, because I've done that before a bunch of times, and frankly, the Sebenza could be a size comparison in and of itself. Next thing, this is the Small Sebenza 21, featuring the Doppler pattern on the top here, and a non-standard, aftermarket edge that I did myself with the KME system. See right there, it's a pretty good edge as far as I'm concerned. But anyways, but this is a Small Sebenza 21. They have recently released the Small Sebenza 31. Well, released in that they've announced it. They'll be, shipping later on. My intention is to pick one of the 31s up. But everything I'm saying about this knife will basically apply to the 31 as well, by and large, unless my impressions are way off. I handled one at Blade Show, and basically it removes this hole, which is a thing, and then it changes the lock bar interface a little bit, moves it to having that ceramic lock ball in there. Basically, the 31 can be considered a smaller quality of life improvement over the 21. There is nothing wrong with it particularly, and if somebody broke in and replaced this 21 with a 31 with the Doppler pattern overnight, although that would make sense because there's no hole anyways, that would be completely fine with me. But you can just kind of go on ahead and assume that everything I'm saying about the 21 here will apply to that little guy there. Then finally, a note. I've actually talked about the Small Sebenza a bunch of times before. I had one early video that I've actually taken down now because honestly it was really bad cinematographically speaking, and it didn't really do a great job of capturing my eventual feelings on the knife. But it was called Why I Returned My Sebenza 21, Small Sebenza 21. And, although I agree with myself by and large there, I don't think it really captures it. I had a second video where I reviewed one of these guys with some inlays that was actually pretty good. Watching that video, I agree with myself substantially. However, that video still ended with I don't think I'm going to keep one of these guys around. But the thing is, this guy's sticking around. And so I wanted to talk a little bit more about my feelings over the long term about this knife and, spend a little bit more time thinking about what has changed for the good as well as for the bad, and the reason that this guy remains in my personal collection here. Because a lot of people have asked me about the knife and whether I still feel, and so it's about time to do this. So let's talk about what I've liked more and more as I've carried this guy more and more, and what I've liked less and less, and then I'll give my final conclusions sort of again. In many ways, I still agree with myself, but yeah, there you go. So, but if you want the full good, great, bad, and the ugly, go ahead and watch that other video. I'll try and link it up in the corner here, but at the very least, it'll be down in the description, or you can go ahead and search Sebenza Shabazz. Anyways, let's go ahead and talk about what's getting better and what's getting worse about this guy. So, on the good side, one thing that is different from my last video is that this is the regular style blade, not the Inkosi variant there. Not Inkosi, the Insingo blade. The Insingo blade is much more of a sheep's foot, whereas this guy is a more conventional drop point sort of affair. I thought that I would okay, operioristically, so to speak, just thinking from first principles, I really should prefer the Insingo blade. And in fact, every time I've bought one of these guys before, I have bought the Insingo. But it turns out that in practice, I kind of like this shape a little bit better. I think part of that is aesthetic. I just like the look of this blade a little bit more than I like the Insingo, even though I do like a sheep's foot, and I do like the ability to make these kinds of cuts. This is good enough in pretty much every domain that I feel like this is, I like this blade shape a little bit more. That was a little bit surprising to me, but, hey, it is what it is. And it also has some nice things, in that you get some flat area here, some belly, a nice tip that's still reasonably strong. This has been a solid blade, and honestly, right now, if you said, hey, Nick, I'll give you a Doppler with an Insingo, I probably wouldn't take it. I think I like this blade shape better, which is a little strange. Next thing that I've come to appreciate on this guy is the carryability of it. The clip on the Reeves is very, very subtle, but it's also very, very good. This is one of the better clips. Oh, that's one of the other changes in the 31 is it cants the clip a little bit more to the side, so the knife carries a little bit more like this, rather than like this in the pocket. It's a little detail, but it's a good detail, and I'm glad they're doing that change. But anyways, this is a knife that is very, very carryable, even compared to one of my standards for everyday carry. That is the Spyderco Delica. This guy carries a lot better than the Delica because it's a little bit deeper, it's a little bit smaller. The size on it overall is quite good. And for me, at least personally, the Small Sebenza makes a lot more sense size-wise than the large. It comes in uncontroversially under 3 inches, which can be a good thing legally speaking in some areas, but frankly, me, it's just the right amount of knife for a lot of the tasks that I have in my everyday life, whereas the large one always felt a little bit excessive for me in my everyday life. So I like that very much. I've also come to appreciate the simplicity of the knife. I mean, at some level, there's not a lot going on here. It's it's two standoffs here. It's a pivot with a bushing and whatnot. It's phosphor bronze. They're really not trying to do all that much, but what they're doing well, right? And that's something I've come to appreciate, because it also leads to a level of trustworthiness, so to speak. I have no, for instance, there are some knives that in my collection. What's a nice fancy knife here? Hold on, let me grab something from over here. Okay, this little guy right here. This is a great knife. This is the Herman Knives Sting in a Damasteel blade. This is a great knife. It has an amazing action on bearings and whatnot, but the thing is, this knife is a little bit of a diva, because you've got some very interesting, like in the back here, you've got a fat carbon fiber back spacer. You've got little tiny bearings and a cage that mostly contains them, and with relatively tight tolerances in there. You've got a lock bar. I mean, this is a knife that is absolutely a great piece, but if I were going out into the wilderness, so to speak, it's not necessarily something that I would want to choose, right? Because I don't know that I could trust it in all kinds of weird situations. This guy, I really can. It's on phosphor bronze washers. That's a nice thing. It's a relatively stain-resistant steel, S35VN. It's just got a bunch of really basic sort of things that mean that it's not a flashy knife. But there's nothing to really get gunked up in there. I mean, I could service this guy very easily, pretty much anywhere, with very basic tools. I appreciate that simplicity of this guy very, very much, and it makes me trust the knife that it will pretty much always work as I'm intending it to, wherever I am, just because it's been designed to do that. It is a good worker, and I like that. Then finally, on the good side, I have to say, part of this is bias completely. As many of you may know, this is not my day job. In my full-time life, I am a research scientist, and I specialize in some areas of acoustics, right? And so, this demonstrates the Doppler effect, and that's pretty much amazing. I very, very, very much like this pattern here, because it gives you, not only is it, personally impressive to me, when I saw this, just like, oh, damn it, I'm buying one, but I also think it's a very nice pattern, because the original Sebenza, without any pattern on there, can be a little bit plain. It's just a gray mass. This is still a gray mass, and from afar, you really can't notice that pattern. It's not super apparent, but when you get it up close, it adds enough complexity, as well as a little bit of gription to it. It's really, really nice. The other thing about it is that the lock bar is still uniformly colored. I mean, the back side and the front side are uniformly done. On some of the patterns, they'll do a nice polish on this side, and they'll do a nice polish on this area here, but then the lock bar remains gray and blasted, and that just doesn't make any sense to me. But I think that this is a very attractive pattern here, and that's definitely brought me some joy. And so, to me, having that is just the kind of little touch it needs to elevate it a little bit beyond, okay, it's a plain titanium handle, but without going so over the top and rococo like the night sky ones, which are absolutely beautiful, but a little bit much, at least for me, for a simple tool. So I think this is a really nice choice, and I love this Doppler pattern and don't regret it a bit. There's a lot of joy there. So to me, those are some of the things that have really started to appeal to me more. Is the Doppler pattern is amazing. I like the simplicity and thus the trustworthiness of the tool. It's a tool that's going to be very hard to break, and over many, many years, it's going to serve me well. It's got good carryability, and the regular blade, for whatever reason, I like better than the Insingo. There are some things, though, that I still don't like, and, this shouldn't shock you. You saw my original review. I mean, the thumb studs still suck. I mean, I'm sorry, guys, but no, that's not an ergonomic shape. I mean, maybe if you're using a lot of gloves, but there's a reason that every other damn company uses thumb studs that are shaped like, well, I don't know, things that don't hurt when you jam it into your thumb. No, no. Just work on that, guys. Seriously. It is still a knife that is very slow to deploy. This is a knife that you open with conscious effort. If you stop at any point here, and it's really not super possible to flick. I'm going to try and do it, but yeah, you can kind of do it, but you really need to have a fair amount of wrist in it, and I'm running this guy on it's not a knife that's going to be like, boom, it's out, in the same sense that, a flip of frame lock sort of thing is going to pop out easily. It's not that, so you got to keep that in mind. I'm also not as huge a fan of the convex edge. It comes with a convex grind on that, which means instead of having a strong V bevel to the edge, it's sort of more rounded. This makes it very easy to maintain with a strop or something like that, but when it comes time to resharpen, means you're either going to resharpen it as a convex edge, which can be very easy on stones, but it'll tougher with the guided system, or you're going to spend the 2 hours it took me to put this fancy edge on it and move it to a V bevel. So I kind of wish that they were doing a V edge, but, you know, it's more of a worker than a slicer anyways with the grind and whatnot, so I guess whatever, it's okay. The ergonomics on this guy is still not great. I mean, I've made peace with the ergonomics is perhaps the way to think about it. The fact is, I don't use my knife all that often on a regular basis, or, well, I use it regularly, but I'm not using it for hours and hours and hours at a time. And if I was, I would want something that is an ergonomic masterwork. There are knives out there, like the Spyderco PM2, that just kind of melt in the hand, that are just like, yeah, this is exactly how my hand is shaped. And so those are really easy to use for long durations. This guy, less so. I've made peace with the ergos, but not really. The large Sebenza remains much better in my hand, but the small is better in my pocket, and, you know, it better reflects my everyday needs, so I'm willing to put up with the ergos, but the ergos still remain not great. And finally, on the bad side, the price is still bad. Frankly, it's borderline ugly still. You can get a bunch of knife for $400 these days. I mean, seriously, for $400, the world is your oyster. And, you know, I think this guy was $425, and but any of the variants can very, very easily upgrade there. And so at that kind of a price, they need to maintain absolute perfection. This needs to come out of the shop perfect. And I don't mean like, oh, little tiny, no, I mean perfect. All the edge bevels need to be right. At that kind of a price point, this needs to be done perfectly. And Chris Reeve is one of the few companies that, by and large, will do that. But they need to maintain that if they're going to keep charging that price. They also need to be making upgrades. The Sebenza 31, to me, is a very welcome change. I don't know what the pricing structure looks like, but it better be the same as the 21, because otherwise, the last thing this needs is a price hike. And in fact, I would argue that they should not even be thinking about a price hike for a bunch of years. Because right now, this knife is, in my estimation, a little bit overpriced. And so in order, they are not going to be changing the knife substantially. And like I said, the 31 to me is a quality of life upgrade. They're not going to be changing the knife enough to earn that price point, and everything else is catching up very quickly. So I hope that if they're not willing to drop the price, they better not be thinking about raising it, because no. Absolutely not. And so to me, all of those things are still the bad, is that this is still not a great value, even if it is a great knife. The ergos are still not something I'm a big fan of, although I've made peace. I still want an easy configuration widget on the website. Speaking of purchasing, guys, come on. I mean, seriously, just make it easy for me to get, you know, this scale pattern in single blade, blue thumb studs on both sides. Just give me a point and click kind of thing. I mean, go to the Apple website and you're done. I mean, that's all you need to do, guys. Well, I mean, and code the thing, but that would make this much more compelling. I forgot to say that. The convex edge can still be a little problematic. It's still a very slow open and close sort of knife, and the thumb studs still suck, and I hope they're thinking about that as a quality of life improvement in the future. But those are kind of the things that have changed. But again, we come back to my feelings on this knife have shifted in some ways. My first video discussed why I was returning it. I was definitely disappointed there. I think the video was fair, but I was definitely disappointed. My second video, I agree with much more strongly. Frankly, I think I kind of nailed that review. This is a different enough knife that I feel like it's better. But that knife ultimately was one I had no interest in keeping around. Now, this one's a keeper, and some of you may be asking, well, what's changed here? There are a couple of things that have changed. I mean, part of it is the Doppler thing. I mean, like I said, interpret it as bias what you will. This is in some ways a perfect pattern for me doing what I do because, well, not only is it related to my, field, but it's also beautiful. It's also low-key. It matches things well. It's just the right amount of fancy for this knife. I think it's a really great pattern and one of the most attractive ones they've ever done. So that's a big part of it. I've also come to respect the Sebenza approach a little bit more. I mean, this is a knife that is simple in terms of its execution. It's not doing fancy bearing action, Damasteel crazy things, but instead, and again, I don't mean to impugn this guy, but it's a different fundamental thing. But I appreciate the simple but done well thing. I appreciate a relatively straightforward working knife that is designed to last. That's true. But maybe the biggest change has actually been in me, in my own perspective. Originally, that very first video, the why I returned my, at that point in time in my reviewing and in my life generally, $400 or whatever it was then, $350 I think at the time, because they raised the price. Guys, no, this is a great $350 knife right here. Just saying. It'd be a gem at that price. Anyways, I digress. Originally, $400 was just so far above my price bracket that it felt silly, right? Like at that point in time, at $400, it's like everything needed to be 100%. The angels needed to, you know, part from the freaking, the clouds part, the angels descend, everyone starts singing and dancing. That's the level of perfection that I needed for me in that piece at that price. At that price, at that time, I was demanding abject perfection. And I kind of recoiled a little bit when it didn't meet those standards. But hedonic adaptation is a thing. Go ahead and watch my video about that, because it gets deeper into this. But the fact is that nowadays, especially now that I've handled more higher-end knives, I'm a little bit more willing, and as my means have shifted a little bit, in part thanks to those patrons at the start. But anyways, I am now willing to let a $425 knife have some flaws. That's maybe a silly position to take, and in some ways you should view this as a source of bias rather than a source of truth about the world. I am not going to be a source of truth about the world generally. But anyways, that has changed. I am now willing to say, you know what, I don't love the ergonomics. I don't love the thumb stud. But I still love the knife enough. And at that time, at that price point, I was not willing to do that. I was not willing to say that. And so that's another area of shift. In terms of my final feelings, I said this in my last review, but I really feel it. This is the Rolex Submariner of the knife game. For those of you outside of the watch world, the Rolex Sub is sort of, it's the prototypical, you know, fancy watch, right? It's, in many ways, the Sebenza is most people's first conception of a high-end knife. And the Rolex Sub was originally a tool. It was a dive watch. It was developed, you know, for diving. And fundamentally, it is a good tool for doing that. But eventually it became a luxury good, right? And the pricing escalated and escalated. And now we're at the point now where Rolex thinks they're so freaking hot that they can... Anyways, that's a whole other rant. This remains, much like the Submariner, an absolutely great tool. This is a very, very good working knife. But it is no longer the apex of working knife in the same way that Rolex is no longer the apex of dive watch. It is a great tool, but there are many tools that are equally good, if not more so, in this price range. And by largely standing still, as the Sebenza 21 model has, although the 31, like I said, is a walk forward. A very welcome thing to see, by the way. But by standing still, by doing the same thing for all these years, it has started to fall behind a little bit. And so we end up with this kind of a weird contradiction, the same sense we get in the Rolex Sub. You get something that is designed to be a good, honest tool for putting in work, but that has become both fossilized in time and at a really, really high-end prestige price tag. Because this is a prestige price tag. If this exact knife were not being made by Chris Reeve, but instead were being, you know, if this didn't exist and a random Chinese company introduced this knife right now, there is no way they could charge this kind of money. There is a prestige element to it, and that's a thing. This is done well enough that I feel like they earn most of that price, but it's just barely there. And so, my final conclusions for you. Is this knife a good value? No, absolutely not. You can get a ton of really great knives for this price, and in many ways, you are paying both for the brand name and for the history. The Sebenza is a canonical knife in the knife world. Many people talk about it. It is, in many ways, a prototypical high-end knife. But part of that is what you're paying for. You're paying for the brand name, etc. So if you're just looking to get a really good knife for the amount of money, you can get a knife that is just as good for cheaper than that. That's 100% true. So if that's what you're after, don't think about this as a good value choice. Would this be my choice for my only pocket knife? A bunch of people have asked. No, probably not. Because there are still some little issues that mean that there are knives I would rather carry. It's not a bad choice as an only pocket knife. And if you're looking at this as being the last knife you ever buy, A, you're lying to yourself because, look, I've been around the block here. I bought many knives that were the last knife I was ever going to need. But nevertheless, there were some little issues that mean that there are other knives in my collection that I would probably rather carry for my everyday life. But one thing that this would be probably is my choice for a last pocket knife. Tony Scullambrini and I did on Gear Geeks Live sometime back you know, what is the last pocket knife? You can only have one knife and it needs to last the rest of your life. This may actually be where I'm going because it's designed to be durable and simple. It's phosphor bronze, a bushing system, it's S35VN, hollow grind bead blast, and a company that stands behind them, that does things like spa service, etc. I think the 31 is only improving that level of things. So I think this is a knife that will absolutely work forever. And so if you gave me that very weird ultimatum, okay, Nick, you can only carry exactly this one piece for the rest of your life, this is probably where I'd have to go. Because I can't think of anything else that quite has that feeling of durability and longevity that this guy does. For me, this knife is sticking around. I already kind of spoiled that, but it's true. Partly because this is a point of reference in the knife world. And as a gear reviewer, it's helpful to have something like this around. To be able to talk about things compared to the veritable Sebenza is actually a helpful thing. And a number of times I pulled it into videos just because it's something that merits discussing. But that's partly because I'm a gear reviewer. But in terms of my personal life, I'm also very lucky that this amount of money isn't burning a hole in my pocket. I mean, again, thanks to the generous support from the community, I'm able to keep something like this in my life, even if I'm not carrying it every damn day. And then the final issue is that as this trip kind of reassured me, this is a damn fine knife on a day that it does find its way in my pocket. I do not feel like I am unequipped carrying this guy. In fact, I feel like I am very well equipped. And in fact, at some level, this certainly could be my last knife, or my only knife if I needed it to be. It's a good enough tool that it's absolutely there. Should you buy one of these guys? That's going to be a little bit personal. If you're liking the large Sebenza, if that's the size that makes more sense to you, then just go for it. Personally, I actually find the large Sebenza to be a little bit of a better knife, although it's not a better knife for me. For some reason, I think part of it's ergonomics, and part of it's just like overall, the large Sebenza is a gem, even at the price. The small one doesn't quite get there. There are enough compromises in ergos and otherwise that I don't quite get to that edge there. But the thing is, so if you like the large, that's to me uncontroversial. Just go for it. If you like the small, it's a lot of money, and it's something that's a little less unique every passing day, and it's low-key, it's utilitarian, decidedly non-flashy. You can spend $400 in a lot of ways and do a lot of things in the knife world, but the thing is, it's also a damn fine knife. The 31 will be too. It's an impressive piece of fabrication, and it is a piece of knife-making history. So I guess, final conclusion, if you don't want a Sebenza, that's okay. There are a lot of people in the community who make it sound like this is the only knife. And generally, it's the old-timer Uncle Randy types. Well, I guess Uncle Randy's of means. But whatever it is, oh, all you need is a Sebenza. You damn kids with your paramilitary tools and your frame lock flippers out there. You just take what Chris Reeve... There's that contingent in the community where it's just like, no, you get your Sebenza and you leave. That's fine. They're welcome to feel that way, but it doesn't appeal to everybody. And there are lots of really great choices out there that are just cheaper than this. I mean, there are knives out there that you can get that are cheaper, just better. Check my gems playlist. You'll find a whole bunch of them. And there are a bunch of knives that could be a better choice for you in your life. If you want something flashier, then this is not going to be your best approach. You want something a little, this is the Nundi. This is another really great choice, which is in many ways similar to the small Sebenza, but is more aimed a little bit at the classy carry sort of situation. But if you don't want a Sebenza, you don't have to get one. That's a silly thing to say, but there's a contingent in the community that makes it sound like this is really the only choice. I don't agree with that. However, you might want one. You might be looking at this and going, yeah, I need to get me one of those. And in that case, go ahead, save up, buy one. You will probably enjoy it. You will absolutely... it'll absolutely put in good work. I mean, it's a good worker, a good Sebenza, so to speak. And I think that's something that you should absolutely consider. So that's my final conclusion is you don't have to have a Sebenza. You don't have to want a Sebenza. But if you do, you're probably going to enjoy it. And at least for me, this little guy is sticking around, even though my feelings on it are decidedly complicated. So there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you. 23 minutes for a follow-up. Damn, I'm verbose. And have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.